Hello, everyone, and welcome. And thanks so much for joining us today for Seeing the Signals Multimodal Intelligence for Life Sciences on AWS. I'm Bonnie, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's session. We're excited to have experts joining us from Reveal HealthTech, Vespa.ai, and AWS to explore how life sciences organizations can unlock insight across the full spectrum of their data, from structured clinical data and patient narratives to medical imaging and commercial intelligence. Now, before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. We'll be recording today's session and we'll send the replay within 48 hours after the session ends. Please feel free to submit questions in the chat or Q&A panel throughout the webinar, and we'll reserve some time at the end for discussion and key takeaways. So let's go ahead and jump in. And I'd love to start by having each of our panelists quickly introduce themselves. So Gloria, if you wouldn't mind, let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Gloria. I lead the Applied AI Lab team here at Reveal. Reveal HealthTech is a service company. We build software solutions for life science and healthcare clients, anywhere from traditional softwares to software that incorporates generative AI, traditional AI. And my team specifically at Applied AI Lab, we get to explore and experiment with the latest advancement in generative AI space and build quite a lot of applications from agentic AI foundation to RAG to now BioCanvas. And so I'm very excited to talk to you all more about BioCanvas during this webinar.
Awesome. Thank you for joining. Ramesh, why don't you go ahead and go next?
Sure. My name is Ramesh. I lead the AI and machine learning team here at Reveal, where I help our teams work with our clients in healthcare and life sciences to solve key problems using AI and machine learning to better understand their data. This includes everything from helping them chat and understand their data to building full-on agentic AI systems. And I've been working at this intersection of AI and machine learning in healthcare for almost 2 decades now, starting with the PhD in machine learning applied to medical imaging, working at a product company, and working in this area for 5 or 6 years now.
Exciting. It's a great space to be in. Ariella, how about you next?
Hi, my name is Ariella Sasan. I am a specialist in data and AI at AWS. I am a computational biologist by training. I grew up working in genomics and HPC. I've expanded into R&D data and AI ML. We're working across healthcare and life sciences to help customers kind of integrate their data and work at scale to get the questions and help the science move forward. So really happy for this discussion because this is such a critical area for our customers.
Yeah, it really is. And Harini, let's close off with your introduction.
I'm Harini with Vespa. I actually lead the industry go-to-market for Vespa.ai, focusing on healthcare and life sciences. And for me, we'll talk more about what Vespa.ai and how it fits into the conversation. But being in the bleeding edge of AI and tech, I love to tell the story of how life sciences can drive innovation and lead the game. Especially now, you see all these announcements coming from the leading AI players on investing in healthcare life sciences models. You can already see where the industry is heading towards. My background has also been working with AI and life sciences or tech and life sciences in general. Previously started off as a bioinformatician, moved on to do real world evidence. And then last 2 years been with tech companies, so also with AWS and then with Snowflake, being able to tell the story. So love to be here, talk about how we can take inspiration from Vespa's leading customers in a range of technology like e-commerce and retail and how those patterns apply to what we are doing in the industry space, like precision medicine, like clinical, like commercial as well.
Amazing. Yeah, so we've got a lot of experience on this call today. So looking forward to a great discussion, and later we'll have a demo of how we're able to solve this multimodal intelligence problem in action. Let's go ahead and start by talking about the bigger industry challenge. So Harini, life sciences organizations often say that they have more data than ever, yet actionable insights are still difficult to uncover. So from your perspective and working closely with many organizations, why is this such a persistent challenge? Is this fundamentally a tooling problem, data problem? Is it something deeper?
So Thanks, Bonnie, for that question. So it's twofold, and I'd like to tell the story with probably a slide as well to see where, in my last two companies, a lot of the conversations has stayed within life sciences around being able to solve the unstructured or the AI problem in adapting it for accelerating time to value. And when you say time to value, it's a lot of different things depending on which part of the business you are. For clinical, it could be getting more the trials done faster, more efficiently, whereas in commercial, it could be doing brand launches faster and cheaper, right? So we looked at productivity improvements. And the word RAG was very often used and overused in a lot of context. But where the people have struggled today is, especially within an industry like life sciences, where 60% of the data is unstructured, people are not able to scale besides the basic chatbot that were talk to my data, which is probably structured and in some cases text chunks. They're not unable to handle very well complex PDF, or if there are graphs or charts, even the PDF or a PowerPoint or a poster is unable to scale that well. You build a chatbot, it works on 60% of the generic questions. The minute you go to a business and they ask very specific questions on enrollment rates or on adverse events for a specific drug product, it doesn't give you the most relevant answer. So there is an aspect of loss of precision. And last is everybody is now building an agent. Some of these agents are doing very complex reasoning tasks, which means you take the output of one agent, send the answers downstream, they think, and then do some processing and send it downstream, etc. So when you chain these agents, your retrieval on your first agent is going to affect a lot of the answering downstream. So the longer the agents are thinking, the more accurate you have to have the retrieval as well. Finally, as an enterprise, everybody is trying to optimize a triangle on the line, which is the cost, performance, and quality. You want to be able to solve for all of it, which is being able to handle multimodal data. I'm not even talking about proteins and images, which you can actually embed as a vector as well. But even complex PDFs at scale, billions of rows, how do I do it find the right answer for the business in a cost optimal manner within compliance regulate in the regulated industry it requires? That's where the challenge is. And a lot of the conversations, even last week, as we aired this at the AWS Summit, was around how do I get the ROI from the AI investments that have happened? How do I do it cheaper, faster, better? So that's where the challenges are pivoted towards. And I like to call this as a RAG as a search problem. And this is where some of the later conversations today and the demo you will see will approach it. Like, don't just think of retrieval as a chatbot, as a RAG. Think of it as how companies like Perplexity solve for search. How do they look at billions of indexes on the web and be able to do that faster, better, cheaper? And that's the same principle we need to adapt. And it is more than just throwing something into a vector database and getting an answer. It's more than doing text to SQL. It's about interpreting the question, applying the filters, ranking the results in a way that you think is right, having benchmarks to rank it, and then reproducing the answer back to the user. I mean, it's a long and winded answer, but that's where the industry needs to head. And that's the challenge that they are grappling with, is how do you do it in a way that satisfies all these different complex constraints that the life sciences deal with.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, it seems like traditional search systems have been developed to work with the structured content, but as you said in the slide, 60% of life sciences data is unstructured. So how do we get the insights from PDFs, images, things like that? That's the gap that we have right now. So I think, maybe taking a step back and talking about multimodal data. I'm not sure if that's a term that everyone's familiar with. So when we're talking about multimodal, we're talking about mixing not just text, but images, text and images, even videos, any sort of mode that this data can come in. And I'd love to bring in the AWS perspective here. So Ariella, we're hearing this phrase multimodal intelligence more and more, but for those who may not work in these AI systems every day, what does this multimodal retrieval actually mean in practice? And are you seeing this shift as well in what you're seeing in life sciences organizations globally?
So we're definitely seeing this. Multimodal is one of the most popular things we talk about with our customers. It's not just about video and images. Think about the science. When we do the science, we're using many, many different types of instrumentation to try to understand the biology around what's going on in a human being. And especially in complex disease, time can be a factor. Different modes can be a factor. You're trying to understand holistically. So it's how do you bring all of these pieces of data in ways that the scientists can really understand and impact the patient. So it's pathology at different time points. It might be genetics, transcriptomics, proteomics, understanding the cell biology, whether it's cancer or rare disease. This is something that our customers are trying to really aggregate to help the scientists synthesize. And really what I want to really point out is, unless a scientist has access to the data and knows it exists, they will never ask questions about the data that they don't know exists. So giving them the ability to really understand the full featureness of the data sets that are available is very powerful to the scientists and ultimately helping the patients.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like if you're not incorporating that type of data in, an accessible way, there could be big gaps in knowledge and understanding and what they can contribute.
Right. It's like, how do you make some of these are highly technical. They need to be processed. They use HPC. They need to be translated into ways a scientist can understand, and how the computational biologists and the translational scientists interpret the same data might require transformation of the data for easy understanding. So some of these are highly technical processes, but in the end, really what you want to do is be able to synthesize the data so the scientists can innovate on behalf of the patients. Like, what can we learn that's new? How can we accelerate this? How can we make this move faster? So multimodal data is something, and bringing it all together in cohesive ways so that we can use AI and we can understand what's going on and try to learn from it is something that many of our customers are looking to do in different ways.
Absolutely. Now, I know this is a challenge, Gloria and Ramesh, you've been looking to solve. So, can you share an example of where multimodal intelligence really changes what's possible in life sciences?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to bring up one slide that we have here where we have four separate use cases being called out. And, Ariella talked about the very scientific research side of things, but we really see multimodal data being very useful along the entire value chain within a life science organization. One of them, top of mind, is in the clinical trial space, as we understand that over 80% of clinical trials may fall short in terms of recruiting truly eligible patients. And part of it is because traditionally the recruiting patient is being done by running their tabular clinical data, maybe sometimes manually going through clinical notes to identify similarities in terms of patient's disease progression and the manifestation of their disease. And so we really look at bringing in additional data such as medical imaging, just like what Ariella and Harini have pointed out, to really bring them cohesively and surface them and really basically turn it into a data playground for our clinical trial workers. And then in terms of, clinical trial control tower, so one thing is about recruiting patient. The other thing is really being able to monitor the trial progress in real time. And a lot of time, the trial data coming in many other formats beyond just, again, a structured data, beyond just the recruitment rate that's being calculated or the site activation rate. It could include adverse event report. How do we effectively parse that, and how do we effectively sort of weave that into the trial protocol is something that we see very powerful when we bring in these multimodal data. We actually have built something very similar for a global pharma company in the commercial side of things as well, where we essentially surface the topics, the sentiment that's been trending in social media, in KOL, to the the field team, so that they can actually start asking the questions. How can they better manage, let's say, some of the sentiment for this drug in this particular channel? And these are the things that really start enabling the end users when we do bring the data right in front of them, so that they can ask their own very specific and experience-driven questions. So we do see tons of values here in each teams within the end-to-end ecosystem.
Okay, so now let's shift from the industry challenge into how this is actually being implemented. Gloria, why don't you get us started by talking about what BioCanvas is and what problem you were solving specifically when building it?
Yeah, definitely. So when we see the potential to incorporate other modality of data beyond just structured and text data, we ask ourselves, is there a way to really build it in a way that's applicable, usable by all of the organizations or the team within the organization? And we quickly realized that depending on the disease area, the drug, the trial, just all of the data, it's extremely hard to build something that is generic enough that it's going to be a plug and play. And therefore, we have built BioCanvas as a accelerator solution where we have basically done the hard work for the first, let's say, 10 miles to getting the raw data, pre-process it, fuse it, and make it ready for retrieval. And then there will be the last few miles whenever we collaborate with clients to make it a highly customized and tailored solution, depending on the disease or the specific workflow that they are looking to leverage this technology. We also have built BioCanvas understanding the very strict regulatory security compliant requirement that or environment that our clients all operate in. And so the intention is to deploy BioCanvas within the client's own cloud environment so that no data is going to go across the firewall and go into the wide internet. And we have our way of dealing with sensitive data and PHI and handling all those important aspects so that there's really enough trust in this solution from day one. So in talking about how we have envisioned and built BioCanvas, we really look at it sitting in the middle. And on the left-hand side, you have all these different data set across different modalities. They could be video, images, audios, time series data. And then having BioCanvas sitting in the middle to do all of the heavy lifting of pre-processing, fusing, harmonizing, so that they can all be combined in meaningful way to speak to the users on the right-hand side, included in these use cases, from medical scientific engagement, interpreting the trial results and understanding how that could play out in real-world scenario, to recruiting patients with highly specific patient queries, and then to commercial drug launch or competitive intelligence analysis. So BioCanvas really is the middle layer here, doing all the heavy lifting, translation, and harmonization. Specifically, I do want to bring it to a very concrete example. So let's use clinical trial control tower as a specific use case here. All we really want to do is to be able to enable our user answer the question they have on the right-hand side. How are my clinical trials doing comparing to target? Not just from like a structured data analysis side of interpretation, but from incorporating the adverse event, incorporating other qualitative feedback that may exist in different data format, or finding patients with similar scan results or demographics. And so to enable answering these questions, BioCanvas has pre-integrated these different components. For example, DICOM data pre-processing, text-based data pre-processing, using multimodal data embedding models to fuse them together, and then store them in robust tensor space so that we can do one-shot hybrid search, re-ranking to improve the search result. All of this are really sitting on top of the customer data. We know that life science organizations have very large amount of data across the lab results, imaging reports, CT scans, clinical notes, and treatment details. So we really want BioCanvas to sit in the middle and help translating the data to insights. So Ramesh, I'm going to pass it over to you to talk more about how things actually work under the hood.
Yeah, so under the hood, right, when we think about multimodal data, we think about, well, yes, there's text, of course, which is sort of what everybody's talking about these days. But now when we have images, then we also have different kinds of images, right? You can imagine that the way we ingest and pre-process and search over a two-dimensional X-ray might be different from how we search over a three-dimensional MRI or CT scan, or even over a pathology image, or even over next-generation sequencing or omics data. And so every modality of data that we bring in sort of has to be brought in, processed, fused, harmonized with the other data sources, embedded in its own distinct way, right? And so when a user searches for, give me patients between this age and that age, with comparable neuroimaging to this sample image, then we have to understand, okay, let's take this 25 and 45. Well, that part is really, we're searching over the structured information. We have the patient's age, but we want comparable neuroimaging. Well, we have to search over the image. Similar cancer pathology. Again, that's sort of a hybrid of an image search and a text search, right? And so we have to make those decisions around how do we take this query and actually use it to search and understand the data we have. And so that's where we really sort of bring the intelligence to multimodal intelligence, thinking about, well, not only do we have to ingest and embed these images and sort of do a search over an embedding and use RAG and so on, we really have to think about a hybrid search that's able to look at these many different data sources, that's able to prioritize each one appropriately, that's able to rank them differently as needed. And again, when we think about these problems, we think, well, every use case is different. There is no one size fits all solution. And so we built BioCanvas with a sort of opinionated set of defaults where we think this is maybe the most common way of doing it. But of course, we like to work with the actual scientists who are going to use the platform to understand, okay, what are you really looking for when you do this? How do we adjust the search, the capabilities, the processing of the images to match that need? And so that's how we go about building things out when we build BioCanvas. So that's like a little bit of what's under the hood. And of course, at the center of that, in order to do this in a robust way, we need a tensor store, a search platform that can really handle that sort of thing. And so maybe I'll hand it off to Harini to talk a little bit about Vespa, which is how we power all of this.
Thanks, Ramesh. And so I'm going to briefly add what's Vespa before we go into the demo, because I think the context setting is very important. So Vespa is a spin-off of Yahoo, established in 2019, and where they were actually serving the entire Yahoo retrieval system. So anything you see in Yahoo Finance was powered by Vespa. It was built specifically for fast retrieval, web scale retrieval. And of course, now it is both some serious bleeding edge logos like Perplexity, Spotify, and others that you see here that we can officially list. The idea that we talked about is the differentiators that life science really needs is four things in my view, right? One is multimodal, which Ramesh nicely articulated. What is the complexity of multimodal? How do we encapsulate not just images, but you can do proteins in spatial transcriptomics, which is an upcoming field in research. You can actually represent how the cell behaves when drugs are induced. Those are modalities that we can represent now in a very good high dimensional database as well. So all of that is where a native tensor store is going to work. So Vespa does native tensor backend in the sense that you can actually represent an entire protein as a vector of vectors as a data point in Vespa and retrieve across that in sub-seconds. That's what a lot of our customers who want to do high dimensional search use. The second angle I want to focus on is precision. Very relevant if you do e-commerce. If you want to go to shopping and you're buying a shoe, you want to be very relevant or personalized in what kind of shoe you're searching for. When you describe something as a red shoe, you don't like an e-commerce platform or a shopping platform that comes and gives you a black shoe, for example, right? How do you personalize that engagement? It's extremely important in those cases. How do you personalize there? And again, there is a lot of features that you do behind the scenes called relevance tuning, re-ranking, representing user signals as context for your retrieval patterns to identify what the user is saying or even searching by image. You want all that precision as well in life science. Imagine you can actually search, as you would see in the demo, pathology slide by providing the visual image itself as a question. You provide a segment of the cell and say, find me similar disease progression or find similar cancer subtypes. Doing that requires relevancy ranking features. Doing that by joining across another modality like unstructured text requires the same amount of ranking tweaking that the e-commerce companies apply. The next three levers I want to pivot on are cost and compliance. You want to be able to do this in your enterprise because a lot of these search you do, whether it's text, whether it's in a hospital or in a life science industry, it's regulated, it's your IP. So you want to fit that into your tech stack. And it should run across any of the cloud vendors or hyperscalers. So Vespa works with all three hyperscalers and it is installed within your VPC. So the data remains there and you do the analysis there. And the last one is cost. You cannot do this with infinite scale. Your 3D images are extremely space intensive. They occupy S3, a lot of tons of storage in S3. Modeling that as a tensor would reduce the image, but when you do the search and you do compute, you want to make sure that you do it in a way that it's optimized for retrieval as well. You don't want to take each image one by one and then do the joining with text afterwards. That's going to eat up compute and memory. So Vespa is geared for being able to do the retrieval and ranking on the fly dynamically within the platform. And that's where you also save on some of the computational cost as well as storage. So the four levers that makes Vespa relevant for these kind of use cases are modality, precision, working with enterprise scale at optimized costs. And they hit the levers that most enterprises are now tackling as they look at ROI.
Great. So with this collaboration between Vespa and Reveal HealthTech, you're able to create this BioCanvas solution. So now that we've talked about the architecture and intelligence layer behind it, let's go ahead and walk through the demo and see how it works in practice.
Yes, so we built BioCanvas anchoring onto specific use case. The first one is a clinical trial control tower and cohort builder. We start off the user journey with this map that actually shows how the trial is performing across different sites across the nation, with the important stats and KPIs tracked on the right-hand side to give user a high-level overview of how things are going. And we understand that for each principal investigators, they do personally follow a selective few of clinical trials. And so in this particular view, we give them a glance in terms of what trials are doing at risk or not comparing to protocol. In this trial detail view, this is where things start getting more interesting because we not only gather specific tabular or structured data from the trial sites, we also gather patient safety experience report, which again may exist in the form of Excel spreadsheets and PDFs. And so we're able to parse them and then show them in a format that's consumable by the end user. A very now common use case in terms of large language model or generative AI is to enable users to chat with data. And here, what we're demonstrating is the ability to actually chat with machine learning model output, essentially training machine learning model to understand the pathway for a clinical trial given the stats. And so that user can ask questions like, can you forecast the viable runway for this trial without any material changes? And so for this particular trial, as we can see, the enrollment rate is really low, and then the dropout rate is actually increasing. And so a very important step for the user to take at this point is to identify truly eligible patients and to increase their effort in patient recruitment. And so we entered this patient recruitment or patient search workflow, where this is entirely powered by what we've just described previously using Vespa.ai's Tensor Store. And here, I'm bringing in a breast cancer scan with the tumor actually surrounded by this bounding box. And on top of this scan, I'm going to enter some of other patient search criteria, for example, their age, whether they have treatment, whether they have family history in terms of breast cancer. And so all of this is going to be executed as I am clicking on this particular button, and the result is going to be presented in groups. So here what you're seeing is mock data, so there's nothing sensitive being shown here, but the idea is that we don't just want to present patients in a huge giant list. We want some other more intelligent way to present patients so that user can actually be able to move this through this workflow more efficiently. So let's look at the exact match group. In this particular list, we can see that user is able to see patients' high-level important clinical data, and then able to click through the attachment here, and the attachment contains the breast cancer image, in its 3D, in this 2D format, as well as important doctor's notes, clinical notes to verify if the patient does have the right disease progression or other important data that meet the eligibility criteria. And so here, what we're really trying to do is to surface all of these highly relevant data in front of the users so that they can start probing a bit deeper and understanding a bit deeper in terms of the signals that they're able to uncover through images as well as notes. And moving on to the commercial use case, we actually have implemented in one of our clients for their commercial team. We start off with a similar view, again, understanding how a specific drug is performing in different regional market. And here, what's slightly different is for commercial team, they may be more interested in understanding what are some of the most commonly discussed topic, and then what is the market sentiment for this drug over time. And so we provide not just a regional view, but also a state view that synthesizes data that could exist in many different forms to present in this more easily digestible format. Now, one way for our user to interact with the multimodality of data here is to be able to chat with their data. For example, a user might be interested to understand what are some of the competitor signals that's been very popular in the market. So the user can enter the search here in this chat window. And what it can uncover are these signals not just through their internal reports, but also through social media posts, YouTube videos. As long as the backend of our application has access to those data, we'll be able to pre-process them and then fuse them, harmonize them meaningfully so that these signals could then be surfaced to the user to significantly shorten the from data moving to insights to the to action workflow.
Great. Well, that was a fantastic walkthrough. And, you showed examples in clinical use cases, commercial use cases. Harini, just a question for you. What additional areas of life sciences and the healthcare value chain do you think can benefit most from this biocanvas approach?
So the biocanvas is, as Reveal had highlighted, is an accelerator. It's a framework where you are not solving only one use case. The idea is being able to bring multiple unstructured data and structured, because it's orchestration that just doesn't involve Vespa, other things, and be able to ask questions across both, right? So the life science value chain is all that. We talked a lot about the early research, precision medicine, clinical, the examples that showed in the commercial. But in between, we do have real world evidence where I personally work with. You have a lot of evidences that get submitted, both literature externally and internally. And you want to be able to surface that. There's always a findability problem in pharma. Ariella can get to it. But we always talk in pharma about FAIR. And more than the other things, the F is the most difficult problem to solve. Like, how do you find what has already been generated in the past? All right. There is institutional intelligence. We talked about like 6-7 years ago, or even before GenAI became mainstream, indexing just all the target and assets that the pharma had worked on over the years was a problem, because people try to reinvent the wheel by going after the same target that they may have evaluated years ago and decided not to proceed further on. That institutional knowledge is lost when somebody leaves a company. How do you surface data from that? So there is a lot of use case in manufacturing, sitting across many SOPs, sitting across batch runs that are sometimes graphs and charts that produce how the answer was arrived, right? You want to go and look at what was your past analysis run looking like, how was the RCA done? That's unstructured, and there is a combination of technique with structure. So the possibilities are endless. The question is, how do you redefine your problem as just not being a RAG, just not being a text to SQL? How do you leverage the framework? And one of the reasons Vespa and Reveal, we came together to solve this was, I'd like to say that Vespa is like the engine, and somebody has to build the chassis to make it a car. So that's essentially considered. Like, we have the engine, and what Reveal is bringing together is this nice chassis that you can use to drive whichever country you want, if you may. So the value chain, besides just these two, is anywhere where you want to talk to high dimensional data, and you want a framework that can accelerate your ability to work with that, that's where you leverage the partnership. Of course, all of this is on AWS, so benefits, both Reveal and Vespa run on AWS. Both partners of AWS, we have it on the marketplace. So spinning something up is an acceleration that you can adapt if you have a hyperscaler like AWS.
Awesome. Now, Ariella, looking across the organizations that you work with, what would you say separates the companies that are successfully unlocking value from their data versus the ones that are still struggling? Because I know there's still a lot of challenges here. So, yeah, what are you seeing that separates the two?
The ones that are accelerating the fastest are the ones that are unlocking their data, like Harini said, and slowly checking off all of the like building the connective tissue between their AIs and their data. So this is not something you can do all at once. It's not just like bringing in, you can't bring in all your modalities at once into one platform and it just automatically fixes everything. You need to start like really planning and figuring out what are the key pieces and prioritize them and then just start knocking them down. Eventually you'll get through all of them and all of a sudden you have a platform that allows you to do things. There are ways to work with partners such as Reveal and Vespa in order to accelerate that and take on some of that burden and let you move towards your goal faster. But the key is to slowly pull apart all of these different challenges in order to make it. Like one of the hardest things in healthcare and in life sciences is really the findability. We have some companies have hundreds of like 100 years of unstructured data available, or even like documents. You're not necessarily going to ingest all of that, but if you can start ingesting even 15 to 20 years back of data, you can already make meaningful decision points based on stuff you've already known has been studied. So the key is start to bring in your data, start to bring in and create the right layers and tags in order to find and ask relevant questions of your historic data, because no one has everything in their head, right? There's turnover, there's institutional knowledge, and there's changes as processes change over time as well. So the key is to have that catalog to make it findable. If it's findable, then you can make it accessible and easy mechanisms to do that, interoperable and reusable. So all of a sudden your scientists can do what the scientists love doing, which is innovating on behalf of their patients and asking the right questions. But they need at minimum to be able to find and know what data is available for them to ask questions on.
So, for organizations interested in building multimodal intelligence capabilities, what is the first step they should take? And Gloria, how can they begin effectively leveraging a platform like BioCanvas from day one?
Yeah, I really want to just replay the gist that Ariella has mentioned, what she just spoke about, which is you got to start from somewhere. For a lot of the client organizations that I've spoken to, when they saw BioCanvas, their first reaction is, but my data is not ready. Sure, the data is not ready at the organizational level, but the data accessibility and readiness differs across different teams. So I think there is an organizational exercise that needs to be done to really understand which team is at a better position to already start doing something that's like three modalities of data, fusing them together, versus some of the team where we got to start with just two modality of data, structured plus text-based or structured plus PDF. And so there's some sort of internal organizational reflection and then sieving through the data readiness that needs to be done as the first step. And then the second step is to really, I think a lot of times when we implement some software within our client organization, there's not enough awareness of change. So there's not enough sort of change management being prepared because we all default to our old way of doing things. And so when we adapt or adopt technology as advanced as generative AI, the operating model is going to have to change. So I think teams and organizations need to be prepared for that at first mentally, then to discuss now we have this tool, it's going to have this tool built for us in the next 6 months. How can we mobilize ourselves and change our operating model so that we can very effectively leverage the insights from it? And I'll let Ramesh speak to the technical aspect of getting ready for BioCanvas.
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of the technical side really echoes what Ariella and Gloria said, which is a willingness to start small and having data readiness. But again, readiness can mean different things, right? Even if just there's some data available, partial data available, and there's a willingness to get started, as long as we have, domain experts who really understand the data, who are willing to come to the table and, talk with our technical experts and have that interaction, that collaboration, that is what really moves these projects forward. That is what really accelerates the progress of the science and also helps us build out the technical solutions more effectively. And so when we find that collaboration, that's a big piece. And then on the technical side, I think this is an interesting one because we've worked with organizations at different levels of technical readiness, right? There are some organizations that are already well into their journey with building out a full technical infrastructure on a hyperscaler like AWS. And there are other organizations that, well, maybe they have an AWS account, but they don't necessarily have as much in-depth infrastructure. And we're really able to work with organizations at varying levels. Sometimes it might affect the speed at which we can get things started, get things off the ground. But we really enjoy working with organizations at varying stages in their journey, as long as there's that readiness to, well, let's try new things, let's innovate, let's, move things forward using, the new technology.
That makes sense. Now, I mean, just to kind of reiterate something that was said before, it's definitely not a one size fits all type of challenge. So it does take some work to identify, key use cases, key pieces of content or information that you want to include. Understanding that there's no magic wand that will fix it all, but it takes some thought, and I think collaborating with Reveal and Vespa can really help accelerate progress in that direction. I'd love to end on a forward-looking note, and this question is for all of you. But what part of this space, as we look ahead, excites each of you the most right now?
So I'll take that first. I think for me, it's just amazing to see the amount of announcements that have come out for just life sciences in the last few weeks. AWS announced biodiscovery. OpenAI announced Rosalind. Claude is doubling down on healthcare big time. I see the Claude for healthcare. I'm sure there's going to be something in life science, I guess, or Anthropic rather. So, and one of the first Gen AI Nobel Prize winner was also in life science AI for AlphaFold. So personally, I think it's a very exciting time to be in healthcare life sciences because the amount of promise and innovation or transformation you get besides, productivity improvements, everybody's writing blogs or creating content, but it's beyond that in our industry where you can do more stuff. And more life-changing stuff, more time to market acceleration. Like you can half the drug discovery time, like from 15 years to probably 5 years, if I hear it right. So for me, to be part of that is exciting. And the question is, how do we make that possible? How do we, like enterprises, how do we adapt bleeding edge tech that like what we are discussing about for the last hour? How do we bring that into mainstream and use that for accelerating the time to value in other cases as well as also something I want to push and be part of. And that it is always not about creating a great model or fine tuning a model. It's about like just rethinking how you frame a business problem differently and taking advantage of ecosystems like this. Like we have three members here. We have a hyperscaler, we have an ISV product, and we have services that are coming together to solve a problem without having to fine tune a model. So how do we bring these things together to an industry to solve? I think we are in an exciting, and that's the every day I think, and we have a new problem to solve and we can solve it. So for me, that's the best time to, the future seems bright for me from that perspective.
Yeah, Ariella, you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I have to agree with everything Harini said. I think we're entering an era where it's really where the tech isn't what's slowing us down, it's what we can think about it, right? With all the coding assistants and the AI, how can we help push an industry forward faster, right? There's so much unmet need among patient populations. There's so much we can do if we can stratify our patients and really find the right drug. Like we're moving towards personalized medicine, and I think we're looking towards getting there faster. So like all the tech can support this. We're getting to points where we can scale. How do we push the whole industry so we help the patients faster, move it down the value chain, higher rates of moving a drug to market? So I'm super excited by everything that's moving so fast, like Reveal, and like all the data work that's going on, all the foundation models. I think the investment in healthcare and life science by not only pharma companies and healthcare companies, by the LLM companies, the foundation models. I think it's an unprecedented time where we're all kind of converging in this space. So it's very exciting to see. Every day there's something new to read about and something to learn about. So it's super exciting in that space, in that way.
Absolutely. Ramesh, you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my perspective, and obviously this might not be that surprising as the sort of technical expert is, I think that for me, what's most exciting is just seeing the way that the technology here is really being used to accelerate the progress of science, right? The fact that we can really see in really tangible ways, Harini mentioned AlphaFold. There are ways in which we are seeing the technology being deployed, improving so fast in so many different ways. Like obviously, all of us see the improvement we have in large language models, but even in visual models and vision language models and these hybrid models, we are seeing a rapid explosion of progress there too. That I think we are just beginning to see the ways that these kinds of models and technologies can be deployed to accelerate progress.
So, Gloria, why don't you close us out?
We all kind of talk at, like the hyperscale, like big organization level, but I think that what I'm really excited about is at the individual level where I've always heard of stories from our chief medical officers where we have patients who are suffering from rare diseases and their families have, year over year trying to find them the right specialist, the right treatment. But there seems to always be this barriers of information because they could exist again in different format, in different system. And then there's also on the physician side, on the life science organization side, they're also sitting with a lot of these data that they have to sieve through in order to answer very specific clinical questions for any specific patients. And so really at the personal level, I'm really looking forward to see the advancement of technology being applied in every single area within our client organization so that these patients don't have to spend years, go through different physician specialists, go through different CT scan in order to really find the answer of what they are suffering from and whether there's any existing treatment or whether there's any treatment in the pipeline to treat their specific type of illness. And I'm excited for that kind of future to come true very soon.
Yeah, that is exciting. I mean, this has been such an incredibly insightful discussion. I know I learned a lot from you all. So I do want to go ahead and leave some room for questions. So if you haven't asked a question yet, feel free to drop that in the chat or Q&A. And if you'd like to learn more, see the demo again, or connect with the teams from Reveal, Vespa, or AWS, we'll be sharing a dedicated resource page with additional information after the session. So let's go ahead and move on to questions. All right, so we'll get everybody back on to answer some questions. And again, if you haven't entered a question, you can still do so at the bottom of your screen. There's a little Q&A button there. So let's start with the first question. And this one is, what would the challenges be in using other vector databases that are cloud native? And why should you use, or why would you use a fusion model?
Yeah, I can take this one. So one of the things that, so a lot of the capabilities that we see with BioCanvas, I think one could in theory do with another, vector database at the end of the day, it's vectors and search. But I think the reason that we chose Vespa and some of the things we like about it are one, that it sort of natively supports hybrid search, the ability to do all these different kinds of search over text, over structured data, over multiple modalities. natively, the ability that it supports like different phases of search natively, so we can have an earlier phase that narrows things down, later phase that is more expensive. These are kind of some of the big features, and then the other main one is scalability. Vespa is built to scale to pretty high volumes of data, and a lot of times, especially with life sciences data, we see high volumes of data, relatively large data sets, and the ability to just, essentially just press a button and scale is really valuable to us because, we often don't want to spend a lot of time doing the back-end ops for our clients. We want to focus on helping enable them to do the science.
Okay. The next question, how do you solve this for commercial, especially when you brought up video embeddings?
So I think when we look at the commercial and more clinical driven use case, one of the thing is just that in the commercial space, there is a broader range of modality or just the format that these data exist in. We mentioned videos, which is a combination of pictures, pixels, and audio file. And there's pure audio file, and these data could also exist in a raw CSV file or PDFs, PowerPoints, and so on. And so that means being able to process this data in this different format become more important for the commercial use case. And another angle I want to take a look at it is precision versus recall. And so within sort of the commercial use case, a lot of users may find themselves wanting to get more information, being able to recall more relevant information rather than getting to that singular answer, which is the precision. Versus in a scientific discovery, you might want to lean more on towards the precision versus trying to get the universe of possible answers, which is recall. So there might be a balance there to strike that are slightly different in scientific discovery versus when we're trying to understand what is the best commercial strategy to launch a particular drug.
Makes a lot of sense. And I think that kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about it's not one size fits all, just really depends on what you're trying to do with it. Okay, we have one more question. So this one is more about Vespa, so maybe Harini, this one you can take, but elaborate how personalization makes sense for life sciences, and do you have any examples?
Yeah, I'll take that. So it's a very popular concept when you build e-commerce, obviously, right? And Vespa does deal with a lot of the leading e-commerce vendors where they pick that for the aspect of personalization. So when you think of in life sciences, it's not that different because you do have different stakeholders internally within the company who are using AI right now unanimously for asking questions and finding insights, either from structured or unstructured. And since the dream of this conversation today has been about multimodal and unstructured data, the kind of response you would give, let's say, for example, the commercial example that Gloria talked about, the person that's looking for information, a brand manager of a specific drug product, the kind of information he might be looking for the same prompt will be very different from, say, someone in the medical science license team. You're kind of searching the same corpus, but the information intent is different because the brand manager is probably looking to see what is the next strategy he might want to have, or a field sales who's looking for the information is looking to have content that they can talk to a specific HCP about. The medical science license or somebody in the medical team might be looking for information that they might want to present at a conference or write a scientific paper on. So the personalization aspect then goes on to the kind of role, which is, or the questions they have asked in the past, that becomes an additional context you will store while responding to a question. So traditional RAG, it's been very simple. You ask a question, you translate the question into an embedding, and then you find the answer in your vector database or your text to SQL, send it back. You don't really classify as to whether there is any other intent behind the question, right? You don't figure out whether the person who asked the question has a specific context that wasn't explicitly mentioned in the question. So we end up asking the users to do a lot of prompt rewriting just to avoid work around the fact. With personalization, that prompt rewriting can be avoided. You actually personalize the user itself as a signal, his department, the kind of interactions he has had in the past. they become additional context you use to guide your answer and make the retrieval more accurate. Those are some of the hooks and levers that we can do with Vespa, which is one of the reasons that I say that we should take inspiration from other industries and bleeding edge tech to imbibe what we can do to make it better in life sciences as well.
Okay. Well, it looks like that was the last question. So I do want to, again, Ariella, Gloria, Ramesh, Harini, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a wonderful discussion. And to all the attendees, thanks so much for joining us and have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.